transitioning to Finland, Finland is very aware of this threat, not only because of a history that I'd love for you to kind of speak to, but also because it is active across Eastern Europe. How are they approaching this? And what is that model that you kind of go into and study that they have really tried to build in order to defend themselves?
Finland has been building a model, and sort of what we're seeing now, which is comprehensive security, is like a culmination of decades of thinking. So the Finns after World War II, so in fact, going even further back, like into the history, the thing that has sort of scarred the Finns historically was the Winter War, which is when the USSR invaded Finland unprovoked. It was over a land dispute that the USSR claimed that they needed to protect themselves from Germany, essentially. So the USSR tried a land grab on Finland. Finland was unprepared for this war, but they fought back heroically, inflicted incredibly high losses on the USSR. I think in the end it was like 5-1. So for every Finn that died, 5 Russians died, or 5 Soviets died. So they fought very, very bravely. By the end of the war, they ended up only losing 10% of their land. So in many ways, historically, you could say, well, some would say, especially sort of Russians would say, that the Finns were defeated, and sort of technically you could maybe say that they were, but actually historically it's viewed by the Finns and others as a heroic victory. They managed to keep their sovereignty against a much larger adversary, and they fought really bravely and proved themselves. But the thing that scarred the Finns about that war in particular is that they didn't receive any help from anyone else. The other Nordic states didn't want to get involved. They didn't want to risk pissing off the USSR and getting invaded themselves. The UK didn't cover themselves in glory and didn't help as much as they should. They didn't really help in any kind of meaningful way. And in many ways, it was kind of you could see some similarities with that and what's happened in Ukraine in 2022. People thought Finland were going to get steamrolled. They thought that the Red Army was just going to walk across and absolutely destroy them. But it didn't happen that way. But from that sort of cultural scarring of that Winter War, of being invaded, provoked, and having to defend themselves and receiving no support, the Finns then developed this sort of mindset that, okay, we can't rely on anyone else. So whatever we do from this point on, we need to make sure that we're looking after us. Anything we do, we have to be prepared to defend ourselves by ourselves. So they decided to take on an approach called total defense. So total defense is, as you'd expect, and it's sort of built off the theory of like total war, especially during World War II. You know, most countries that were involved in World War II adopted some form of total war, including the UK, which is essentially mobilizing every aspect of society, all of your economy, everything around fighting a war, because it's sort of like an existential threat. Basically. So you have to mobilize every aspect of your society to defense. Now, for smaller countries, you could say that for smaller countries, more or less every war is existential. Because if you're being taken over by a bigger ally, they will just steamroll you, and that's it. That's the end of your sovereignty. So traditionally, total defense has been linked to smaller countries. So, for example, Finland. During the Cold War, you had Sweden did the same. Switzerland currently does the same. Former Yugoslavia does it. Currently, I think Singapore has a total defense model. Israel has a total defense model. Yeah. So smaller states who perceive themselves to be under threat do this total defense model. Yeah. So this was the case throughout sort of the Cold War. And the idea was, alongside their total defense model, they were also going to stay neutral. So they didn't want to take sides between NATO and the USSR. So they essentially made the decision, we don't want to be invaded by the USSR again, so we'll be friendly with them. But equally, we want to be friendly with NATO because we don't want to be perceived as being on the Russian side, which we're not, because realistically, the Finns knew that they were more European than Russian.